Bible being banned.
They're not just trying to ban the Bible. They're also trying to ban the Book of Mormon.
Real in Utah?
In Utah.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bearded Bible Brothers. We're here for a new, we're still doing kind of a separating out episodes, standalone episodes before we jump into our next series. But for today, we've got a fresh one for you. Josiah, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about recent news events. And
Yes.
it's a doozy of a one. We weren't sure. We've already talked about this. We weren't sure about bringing up politics as it is, but there's some recent events that have taken place that that we do have some thoughts on, and we would definitely want to bring to your attention. These are some events that are probably not likely to be covered in mainstream news outlets. So without further ado, I guess we'll kick this off with the most recent. Over the weekend here in Utah, where I live, a news report broke that said the Bible was officially banned from the Davis County School District. Davis County is south of where I'm located, and Davis County has tended to be the more, at times, progressive county in Utah, which is kind of interesting because Utah tends to be very conservative and very Republican.
Right.
And so you can easily go online. You can type in some keywords such as Utah, Davis County, or Davis County. That's the name of the county, just Davis County, Bible ban or something like that. And you'll find that there's been an official ban of this. And the reason cited was that it contained incest, prostitution, and rape. They believe it's one person, and that this person is also attempting to get the Book of Mormon banned as well. So what do you think, Matt?
Now, I want to ask for clarification on the ban. The article I saw didn't sound very definitive on this point, but it said that the ban was for elementary and junior highs, but that
Correct.
the Bible would still be available in high school libraries. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
That is accurate.
Just to round out the conversation a little bit.
Sure. No, absolutely. And that was also included for the Book of Mormon. The same limitations would also be applied to it as well.
Gotcha.
But to my knowledge, there wasn't any specific reasons as to the Book of Mormon. Now, it could be, I could easily probably extrapolate the possibility that it is related to something very similar, at least for perhaps violence. There is a lot of violence in the Book of Mormon. So, but there hasn't been a consensus word on the Book of Mormon yet.
Gotcha.
But the Bible has been officially banned.
It just shocks me the lunacy of the reasons given. There's a huge, maybe not huge, there's a large movement right now in our nation to try and decriminalize, maybe not fully legalize, but decriminalize prostitution and sex work.
Yeah.
And they're using that as justification to ban the Bible. And there is no shortage of violence in our culture. I mean, Chicago or Cincinnati or St. Louis are actually playing out. We're not even just talking about the video games and movies anymore. Although there's no shortage of it there either. There hasn't been for 35, 40 years. But it's so clearly not the real reason they're trying to ban the Bible, because they celebrate these aspects in all other walks of life. They're trying to legalize or decriminalize pedophilia.
Right.
Clearly, this is not the reason that you don't want the Bible in schools.
It comes across as an incomplete thought. okay, so if we make the Bible out to be this sexist, sex-riddled book, then the argument can also be flipped to say, well, there's other books in the library probably that you could find that would also contain stuff like that. So we need to get rid of that as well.
Right.
And so that's why I sometimes, well, even when I hear stuff on the news or some of these YouTube videos, everybody's got this thought, but it's not a complete thought. They haven't really fully thought it out as to, well, if I did this and I had took this standing, then this could be a result of that. And it could also be taken and flipped and used in this way as well. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I would actually say that that's a quite commonplace norm within human thinking. You don't see everything all at once. And
that's true, but I'm going to push back because that assumes that it's a logical error. That they just made a mistake in not thinking it all the way through versus there's a real and genuine agenda behind it. While they're actively trying to ban the Bible, they are also actively not trying to, they are actively putting pornography in elementary school libraries. And this has been happening for over a year. And I think most of us have seen videos of parents at school board meetings reading bits of these books that they checked out from their child's library, and the school board interrupts them and says, please stop reading that, there are children present. And the parent goes, that's my point, why is this in the library? And now they're actively trying to get rid of the Bible because it has this. No, right. This is not just an error in logic and they didn't think it all the way through. There's an agenda.
You know, it's not quite a little bit of pushback on that. It's I have, I guess everybody has the conspiracy theorist in their family. And I have an extended family member who tends to be an interesting conspiracy theorist. And the conspiratorial aspect of that, I guess for me, the reason why this conspiratorial aspect is kind of obvious. Well, I don't know if it would be obvious, but I could hear it a little bit, is that I've heard it so much. Sure. And thankfully they didn't really help me out with that because every time I saw this extended family member, the something new, it's like, really? Wow, really? And I even had another family member approach me one time during COVID and told me that it was a weaponized conspiracy. It's like, okay, I don't know. But I don't doubt that there is a deliberate attempt to do this. And one of the questions that I've asked, why does this happen? And the answer I keep coming back to is, this is human nature. This is what society can look like without God's standards at play. And that's one of the things that over the years, over the decades even, I remember sitting down with 80-year-olds back in the 90s and hearing them talk about things changing, or what they thought was a good change, or what they thought wasn't a good change. And it could be any number of subjects. And one of them very poignantly said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the standards of the world is always going to be in conflict with another set of standards, regardless of whether that's Jesus or God or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
People's standards are always going to vary. And it's not as poignant, I guess, in the paraphrase as it was when they were telling me in person. But we see that in spades these days. And the response that I give it myself is that, why should I expect from non-believers to behave and have the same standards as me? Because for me, that would be an unrealistic expectation. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, but I also find slight fault in the premise.
Well, the fault that I would find was that there would be also an aspect that there can be a standardized morality. Can we all agree that pedophilia is wrong? Can we all agree that murder is wrong? Can we all? And then so that would be the error that I could see. What do you? What is your error
That is
observation?
one. The other, the one that I was thinking of is, your question was, why would I expect an unbeliever?
Uh-huh.
Um, in a real practical sense, there's no such thing as an unbeliever. Might not be a believer in Yeshua or in Adonai,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but everybody believes in something.
True.
And I think I brought it up on the podcast before. Jonathan Cahn's most recent book, Return of the Gods, fantastic book about how the ancient Canaanite deities became the Babylonian deities, became the Greek gods, became the Roman gods,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
basically were put on complete
Yeah.
hiatus when Christianity took Europe by storm in the Black Plague and the bubonic plague, because the
Hmm.
Christians were the only ones sticking around to to nurse the sick, and they
True.
loved selflessly. And so for a long, long time now, all these real spiritual forces, not just blocks of wood and stone, but these real demonic spiritual entities have
Hmm.
been kind of on hiatus, but they've been very much working their way back into America, and
Hmm.
largely starting in 1972 when Roe v. Wade became law. Or, well, it was in the courts in 72, became law in 73. But
Hmm.
um, it's so terrific book. If any of our listeners have not picked that up and read it, I would highly recommend it. But everybody believes in something.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
your belief is that true freedom for humanity means having sex with absolutely whomever you want, and getting paid to do nothing at all, and entitlement and all of this kind of stuff, if that's your worldview, that's going to shape how you view everything else. And obviously, the Bible is going to be a significant issue if
Hmm.
that is the worldview being held to.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I I sometimes get lumped in with conspiracy theory uh, folks or ideas, but I don't think it's necessarily conspiracy theory. Like, I don't know that there's a figurehead behind the scenes controlling
Oh,
everything, but
yeah.
I think it's very much a clash of worldviews. And
Hmm.
I very much
Hmm.
believe that there are spiritual entities behind that. So,
Oh, absolutely.
if the worldview that's being pushed is pro sex of all kinds, transgender, and change your gender any which way you want, and then there's this
Mm-hmm.
massive spectrum of genders, yeah, the Bible's going to be an issue for you, and you're going to want to ban
Right.
that. That makes complete sense.
Yep.
And so, and also at the exact same time, you are going to want to try and put pornographic materials in elementary schools.
Hmm.
And who cares if your logic is invalid, that's the same premise as to why you want to outwardly, that's the same premise as why you want to ban the Bible. That irrelevant. The goal is to ban the Bible by whatever means necessary, because it flies in the face of the worldview.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. And the specificity of the statement I made earlier would be more specific to the fact that they are non-believers of Yeshua, they're
Right.
non-believers of Adonai, and they do not follow Adonai's standards.
Right.
Just this past week, my son and I had some interesting conversations. I've mentioned this before, but we were talking about, oh, what was that? Oh, that's right, we were talking about stuff, we were talking about things.
Mm.
And I had him read Luke chapter 12, where Jesus confronts a young man. About a young man has actually approached Jesus and told Jesus, hey, I want you to tell my brother to share the inheritance.
Right.
And that Jesus says, but your essence does not consist of things. And so we ended up having a conversation with that, and it actually took us into Matthew 6, the disciples' prayer, where it says, and give us this day our daily bread. I even took it back to Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9, which talks about, which the writer is talking about, Lord, give me the portion for today. And then we took it even a step farther back, and that further back was Leviticus 19, and how the ger, the foreigner, and the poor were being looked at by God, and by God telling the harvester, do not go back over your field, do not pick up anything that's fallen, and also only harvest toward the corner, but do not harvest the corners. That way those that need it can come and get it. And he's sitting there, and we're having this really interesting conversation about it. And he says, and my son, he has these moments where he goes, okay, I think I get it. And he was saying then that the items that he cherishes the most are not as important as he thought they were. And then I asked him, well, who do you think, or what do you think is important? Because part of Luke 12 also discusses what the riches that we have with God. And what I saw coming out of this conversation for me was that we get so lost in what we're doing or what we're attaining that we forget about the people next to us.
Right.
We forget about the relationships that we're already committed to, and how, whether it's spoken or unspoken, how those relationships have been contextualized or defined, or how they've been set to operate. And for me, that has also been the case, I would admit, over the years in my relationship with God. There are some moments where I've been either quiet with God, or I've expected things from him that were unbiblical, or outside of his character. And you can even see this in TV shows, but do this and make this person fall flat on their face or something like that, and I'll love you forever or something like that. It's just, that's outside of God's character. But
Right.
the unrealistic approach that I would say not only the world, but even, I guess we really are getting into politics here, that even the evangelical and Christian church can get into, is also just as saddening as what we're hearing in the news these days. Because I grew up in a circle that had a definable idea of who God is and what he does. And sadly enough, that was hardly influenced. I didn't say completely, but hardly influenced by the attributes that are attributed to God, even in the first 5 books, the Torah, or as some people call the Pentateuch, where he says that he's slow to anger and abounding in love. And that
and faithful to 1,000 generations of those who love him. And he does not turn a blind eye to wickedness, and he does judge to the 3rd and 4th generation. But it's 1,000 to 3 or 4.
correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just quoting that just kind of triggered some things for me that I was remembering. But suffice, no matter what I was told growing up, no matter what I was led to believe about God, the God I've come to know, Yahweh, this person that I've come to know, is real. He does exist. He has shown that he exists, and that through the person of Jesus, of Yeshua, the Messiah of Israel, that there can be a realistic and holistic approach to understanding and approaching God in a way that's going to maintain I'm not trying to sound too scientific here, too academic, but the words that are coming to mind, that maintains its context. Because the reason I say it that way is because not only has the Christian church tended to proof text God out of his thinking, especially out of the Judaic thinking that's definitely established in Scripture, but even today, what is the top three things that the United States is known for? Well, one of them is that that the adults believe that in angels, that there are angels, and you just take that one topic there, and you can see what entertainment, what culture, what society has taken the idea of angels to the point where you don't even recognize that an item that or a depiction that they create is supposed to be about angels. It's like, really? I don't see that. But what happens when there really is no grounding or tie down to a thought, and it just continues to float, and it continues to morph and change over time? What else do you expect to have happen? But at the same time, I'm going to say you are absolutely right in saying that there is definitely, I would say there's definitely an agenda that people are agreeing upon and working towards, such as the getting rid of Bibles, and making the sexual exploitation of people legal. I would definitely agree that when more than one people find themselves in agreement with each other, that there is a semblance of working together and getting something that they want changed or have happen.
Yeah. And
you brought up before we started a story that I had not heard yet. Could you bring that up?
Yeah, so there was another news article that we wanted to chat through today. I think it was about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago now, that a young man, a 16-year-old Canadian in Canada, was arrested for handing out Bibles on a street corner. He was not selling them. He was not preaching. He was not detaining anyone. He wasn't getting in loud arguments with anyone. He was literally arrested for handing out Bibles. And as the police officers were putting cuffs on him and ushering him into the car, the young man, full of boldness, I don't know what his name is, but way to go for him, um, was talking to the officers about God and about how his being arrested is not an inconvenience or anything like that. It's an honor, a badge of honor that he wears, and he's grateful. Not grateful to be going to prison, but grateful to be considered worthy of persecution for the name, as it says in the book of Acts.
Here it is. I actually found an article about the incident.
Okay.
It took place in Alberta, Canada. He was handing out Bibles after an altercation broke out between him, his supporters, and a group of counter-protesters. His name is Josh Alexander. He's 16 years old. He even posted something on Twitter about the event. And his final statement in that post was, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." But that he goes on to say that he was released, but told if he returned, he would be, quote, he would be arrested and charged, end quote. He goes on to repeat what he said. He also said, "I will not yield to the pressure of the woke mob or corrupt state. We will continue to spread the truth in love." And there's somebody else apparently that's definitely picking up. Oh, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, a guy named Maxime Bernier or Bernet. I don't know if that's the French pronunciation, but
Sure.
Condemned the local law enforcement officers for their apparent double standard in meting out justice. But I don't see the actual charges that's been filed against them. Did you?
Well, from what you just read, it sounds like he wasn't charged, but he was threatened that if he comes back, he will be charged. And that's the way things are going right now in Canada and in America, is the intimidation tactics. Even if there aren't laws against what's being done, if it goes against the worldview of those in charge, then intimidation is fair game. Even if we
Yeah.
can't necessarily charge you, or really twist law to make it look like you did something that we could charge you for. If we can't do that, then we'll just intimidate you. And this has happened all over the world to believers, to Jews, and to followers of Yeshua. This has been happening since Yeshua ascended back into heaven. So it's not altogether surprising, but it's my firm belief that this is happening in the States as well, but not getting reported on. I don't just say that willy-nilly. I think that that is solid fact. But there were also a couple of 80-year-olds I don't remember what state it was, a couple of 80-year-old gentlemen who were praying outside of a abortion clinic and were physically attacked, and one of them, I think one of them just suffered a concussion, if I remember right, and the other one had to have complete facial reconstruction surgery because the attacker used a rock and tried to smash his face in.
Oh my.
Just two guys praying for and with young ladies who are on their way to have an abortion. And then there are the more publicized events. But today we specifically wanted to highlight the ones that likely didn't make the mainstream newsreels.
Right. Which, by the way, for Alexander, there was another issue he had. He was permanently banned from school after he held a protest over the transgender policy, making the case the concerns of his female peers had not been addressed. He says that he had 2 suspensions, 2 exclusions, and a trespassing notice. And when he actually did return to class, after he had served all the suspensions, he still had the exclusion order in place. And so when he tried to go back to class, the school authorities said to him that, quote, his presence in the building would be detrimental to the physical and mental well-being of the pupils. Right. So he was met with police upon his return. Wow. You know, it's interesting. It's that it takes me, there was a historical figure. This is actually a historical figure you may not hear, you may never have heard of before. Have you ever heard of a guy named Edward Bach?
I don't believe so.
Edward Bach was an immigrant to the United States. I can't remember where he's from. I think Sweden. I think either that or Switzerland, something like that. But the thing is that he was at 13 maybe. And he told his mother one day, I'm not going back to school. And she says, but you need to go to school. You need an education.
How long ago did this take place?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. This happened back in the 1800s.
Okay.
This happened back in the 1800s. Thank you. That's necessary to pinpoint here. But yeah, it happened back in the early mid 1800s, and his reason to his mother is that I want to make money, but that not just to make money, but that he could get an education by going to the library. I think Benjamin Franklin really stumbled upon something good when he did what he did with the library system. Because Edward Bach is not the only one to have had this this argument, but he won the argument with his mother. And he wasn't just a businessman; he connected with people. And the amazing thing is that this guy went on to be a newspaper reporter, and a well-recognized one at that. And he also had connections to some of the most prominent leaders, presidents, world leaders, and prominent societal leaders that he connected with throughout his life. And you see how, for him, such an event taking place was so positive, because even though the school didn't really meet his needs where he was at the moment, he still had the determination and drive to see his education continue. Now, I'm sure I wouldn't be a bit surprised really if my son knows of Edward Bach, and I won't be a bit surprised if at some point he tries to use Edward Bach in an argument saying, okay, Dad, I'm not going back to school. But my simple answer will be, well, things have changed since Edward Bach, and so you're going to fulfill this. But the point that Alexander ends up making here is, he says that, quote, the indoctrination level is so high right now. He warned of how the school system handles political, ideological, and moral differences of opinion that, quote, I wouldn't even call it an education system anymore. It's an indoctrination system, end quote. What are your thoughts on that statement?
I completely agree. And I know that a lot of people who attend church, maybe go to a Bible study, a lot of people don't tend to watch the news very much because it's sad or it's depressing or it causes anxiety. I understand that.
Yeah.
But for anybody who's really paying any amount of attention, I think that his statement is fairly spot on. Yeah. Anybody who's really paying attention, and I'm not talking about digging through the weeds, anybody who's simply watching what's taking place. And okay, let me clarify something.
Okay.
If looking at some slightly smaller, slightly less than mainstream news outlets is considered digging through the weeds, yeah, do that. But if you're just watching MSNBC and CNN and stuff, you won't know what's going on. But if you're looking at any of the almost same size but lesser known news outlets who show the alternative, show the news that the mainstream ones won't show, anybody who's looking at that level, it's very apparent that the worldview that is currently in charge is pushing this agenda. And it truly is an indoctrination. If you look at any of the statistics of kids graduating junior high, graduating from high school, look at their reading levels, look at their arithmetic levels, look at all of their stats. It's been several decades that colleges have had to reduce down their entrance requirements on those types of very basic skills in order to get any students at all.
Right.
Everything has been a dumbing down, and now we're also seeing a complete replacement, not just a reduction of what ought to be taught, but now a complete replacement of things that really ought not be taught.
I've had my kids in public school for the past few years, and it was not an easy step for me to make. Primarily because I was indoctrinated. The indoctrination process isn't simply confined to the public school system.
No.
I was homeschooled my entire life. My mom started teaching me when I was 3 years old, just some basic stuff. And then she got me started formally when I was about 5.
Okay.
And I graduated when I was 17. I had to go do a PSAT, a practice SAT test with the state in order for them to even validate all my education, because up until that point, there was no intercommunication between homeschoolers and the state system. Even oddly enough, the local school system in the town we used to live in actually openly discussed suing my parents because they did not put their kids in the public school system, which was just crazy. But it didn't happen. But suffice it to say, what did happen is that when I was planning, when my wife and I were talking about putting my kids into public school, my mother made some harsh comments, which we talked about later, and it was all squared away. But it still remained that growing up, I was led to believe that rock and roll, the band Kiss, or all sorts of music from anything other than CCM was satanic, and that all public school systems are dangerous. Part of the reason that my parents had for homeschooling us was that even back in the 80s, there were issues. There were gun issues. There were bomb threats even in the 80s. And so they wanted to keep us out of that. And I remember sitting there in the living room watching Columbine happen. Why they had to televise part of that, I don't know. I had mixed emotions. But because I did actually know some of the students that were actually involved. I was close with a youth pastor what was her name? Rachel. I can't remember her last name. She was one of her youth. Anyways, so I'm sitting there watching this, and my parents say, "See, this is the reason why we kept you out of public school. It's just too dangerous to go there." But over the course of my son and my daughter going to the local public school where we're at now, I cannot say categorically that it's, quote, evil. It's not evil. Some of the people I've met are some of the most genuine people I've ever known.
Sure.
And they have a heart to see my kids succeed and grow. And so I would agree that there are definitely places and systems that are currently using their format to indoctrinate. I can't say that it's actually my kids' school because I sit down regularly to talk with their teachers and discuss what's being taught in the classroom. And I've even already talked with the librarian to see where things are with content in the library. I do live in rural Utah. And there are very, very few, from what I understand, there's less than 12 believers in Yahweh that live in this town. All the rest are LDS. But nobody's made what I would call an attempt to indoctrinate my kids one way or the other. But I guess I'm going the long way around of saying I do agree. And the reason why it's hard for me to say I agree is admitting the fact that it's happening. Because you don't want it to happen. My response is I want it to be a dream that this isn't happening, but it is. And one of the first steps in solving a problem is recognizing there is one.
Right.
And a question could be is how do you resolve this? And there's any number of reasons. I remember my wife and I have recently talked about the gun issue and whether or not it's an actual issue, or is there something else that's a root of the problem here? And so when you have so many voices offering an opinion, it's kind of hard to be able to focus on not just the problem, but even the root of the problem sometimes. And
sure.
I hope that at some point that there could be, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is I hope that at some point that there could be a open, even mature conversation. Because sometimes when I watch this stuff on YouTube and I see these people doing these talks at universities, I often ask the question, is that even useful? Because all it seems to turn into is this back and forth between the speaker and some person who just has a bone to pick. And it makes me really wonder if that's actually proving useful.
Sure.
But in my own experience, how else can somebody change unless they're introduced to an opposing idea? And so,
also, yeah.
Can it be useful? An answer, yes, it can be. But then when you're presented with something and you're wondering, was this a good idea? That's also a matter to bring up, because Matt, oh man, I remember calling you a couple of weeks ago and we talked about what happened with Israel. You remember that?
Yep. Yep.
Israel has been the most condemned nation out of the UN for a while now.
I think year after year, I think the stat is that the UN passes resolutions condemning Israel or attempting to discipline Israel. I think the stat is 10-1 over any other country. And this is not just last year. This is year after year after year. I think it's 10-1.
Well, yeah, even just doing a quick search here, Israel is the most condemned by UN in 2020, 3 times other nations. And then the UNGA adopted 17 resolutions against Israel this year. That was just back in 2020.
Yeah.
But a recent news breaking report was that, and there's some history to this. Back in 37?
What?
No, excuse me, 1947.
48 is when they became a nation
48.
again.
That's right, 1948, May 17, I believe it is, wasn't it? Or May 15, one of those two dates? Yeah, okay. The UN voted in a majority to ratify Israel as its own country. But
And if anybody wants to read a really fun book about how that all went down and the political stuff behind the scenes that led to that, it's a novelized account, but fairly accurate, called Born Again 1948.
Oh, interesting. Who
Just
is that
throwing
by?
that out there.
You know, who's that by?
Mike Evans.
Mike, you're looking at your bookshelf, aren't you?
I sure was. It happens to be sitting right there.
And it's a novelization?
That's
yeah, cool.
But it's factual characters. A couple of characters are made up, but as far as the leadership of Israel at the time, the leader of Shin Bet and the military and all of that, and the people who were on the committees of the UN who took the tours of Israel, Palestine to see what was going on. It's a great, easy read of the history of how Israel became a nation again.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is cool. I did not
But
know.
anyway, back to what you were sharing.
Yeah, so this past May, the UN, after all these condemnations of Israel and all these votes against Israel, actually voted again. And I can't remember the exact number, but the exact number that was in favor of Israel back in 1948, thank you, had completely flipped. And the exact number was opposite now for the declaring Israel as a, quote, catastrophe, end quote.
And the numbers are roughly 2/3.
Yeah. So there was roughly 2/3 in favor back in 1948, and this time it's 2/3 against Israel.
Now, to clarify, that does not mean that the UN voted to remove Israel's statehood. Not yet, anyway. No. They're just blowing smoke, basically saying this was a huge mistake.
Right. What do you think this could mean, though, for Israel in the long run, Matt?
In a lot of respects, a lot of the things that the UN does, condemning Israel, every time they defend themselves against terror attacks or rocket launches from Gaza, which no other nation would at all be condemned for defending themselves against an actual military assault.
Well, Ukraine being a good example of that.
Exactly. So basically it has no effect. The UN is just talking, and but it also shows the consensus of world opinion, at least the leadership of the globe, their opinion of Israel, their opinion of the Jews. I mean, in the last year, so most people are aware that New York has the most dense population of Jewish people outside of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
In the last, I think, year and a half, 2 years, anti-Semitism in New York has gone up 350%, and that's just in a year. Global Semitism or
Whoa.
anti-Semitism right now around the world is higher than it was in 1937, 38 when Hitler was at the height of his power
Wow.
globally. So
Wow.
yes, the UN is making noise. Is it going to change anything on the ground in Israel? I pray it doesn't. Um,
But
I
it could
think
continue to influence, though, right?
I think it'll continue to influence, and I think it's also kind of paving the way for them to, at some point, attempt
Mhm.
a vote to remove Israel's statehood
Oh, wow.
or to force the two-state solution of Israel has to give up some of its land
Mm.
to a Palestinian entity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this is groundbreaking in what it's going to lead up to. But as far as
Mm-hmm.
practicals of anything specific to this vote, not so much. But keep in mind, this is just my opinion. I'm not a politician. I'm not anything like that. This is just me reading my own stuff and praying it through.
Sure. Well, I think, folks, I would like to say this to you. I've come to very much regard Matt's opinion, especially when it comes to Israel, as a very good thing. And I would say a well-informed one as well, well-informed. His love and passion for Israel is very, very deep, and in my opinion, quite extraordinary. His love for Israel has actually influenced my own, and I'm very thankful for that. So, Matt, thank you for the influence you've made on me, even to continue to support Israel, even when it's being met with such adversity and opposition as it is today.
Yeah.
There is one last one that I'd like to bring up.
Sure.
This wasn't covered in any news reports. I happened to hear recently, I happened to hear recently
From a trustworthy source, I would assume.
from a trustworthy source that's actually involved in the International Mission Board with the Southern Baptist Convention.
Okay.
They gave a presentation, and it was a really good one. Don't get me wrong. They were actually talking about Europe and the work that's going on there, and the general malaise. That wasn't their word, but overall the general malaise of Europe to Christianity. They're just not really caring. They focused on Macedonia and Greece, actually, in showing that the orthodoxy there had created this overall sense of, okay, whatever sort of attitude. And that when I even asked a question regarding whether or not the historical significance of the places, such as what's now known as Thessaloniki instead of Thessalonica, is what I want to keep saying. Thessaloniki doesn't have as much influence on people there at all, because as we know from scripture, that's where Paul also went and did mission work and was establishing congregations of believers. And so it was very interesting listening to them and talking about the spiritual condition of Europe. But I brought up Ukraine. And the amazing thing is that the news that they gave about Ukraine was extraordinary. Apparently, people are coming to know the Lord in droves. And there has been even more. I can't remember the number. She said there was a number of baptisms, and it was just a very high number of baptisms. And then also the request for Bibles is extraordinary, she said.
Yep.
And I think it's absolutely encouraging to hear this. It's unfortunate of the circumstances. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants death. And yet people are now asking to know more about God in ways that they've never known before, which I think is very encouraging, given that Orthodoxy also has a hold in Ukraine, especially Eastern Orthodoxy. And as we talked before in one of our church discussion, was that in Eastern Orthodoxy, you're really not given access to the Bible at all. But in this case, people are saying, I want access to the Bible, and they're actually actively seeking access to the Bible. Yes. There was even, she even mentioned that they are providing, what's that called? The wind up radios to a lot of them that have been automatically tuned to certain radio frequencies that do Bible shows or Bible study programs over the radio. Ooh. And it was just, I found it very, very encouraging to hear. And I told her I'll be praying for her, and that if we can find any way to support her, we can. But it was just one of those things that I don't know if you're ever going to hear of that in any news reporting. I personally have not gone looking yet, but it was definitely one I wanted to bring up. So
but this is there again. This has happened for 2,000 years and before that. When comfort is removed, the gospel spreads.
Right.
We talked about it in our last church episode about the underground church all over the world, specifically asking, please do not pray that the persecution ends, because it brings fruit. And Tertullian famously stated that the blood of the martyrs is the fertilizer of the movement. And the more
that's right.
And so this is not a new phenomenon, but this is what happens. And in a lot of respects, and I've mentioned before that I believe persecution is coming to the Western church, to followers of Yeshua, and to the Jewish populations in America, in Canada, and in parts of Europe. And I think some of the news stories we've highlighted today make that case pretty strongly. But I pray actively. This is not a phrase that I use. I actively pray that as the difficulties arise, that Adonai would do the exact same thing here. That he would use it to separate the wheat from the chaff. Those who just attend because that's what they do on a Sunday or on a Saturday or on a Shabbat, and it's just part of the routine, versus those who are seeking to be disciples and seeking to grow and seeking relationship, who are submitting their need to him. Romans 10:9, the famous verse that always gets cited regarding salvation. If you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It's imperative that we realize those two things are in the present tense. It does not say if you have confessed at one point, and if you have believed and at one point at a camp when you were in middle school or something, or if you felt emotional in a church service and you went down front and prayed a prayer. That's not what it says. It is the present imperative. It is ongoing. If you continually and persistently, regardless of circumstance, regardless of what persecution comes, if you continue to confess with your mouth that he is Lord, and if you continually believe in your heart that God has indeed raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. This is why it's not in conflict for the Bible elsewhere to say those who endure to the end will be saved. It's not about a one moment in time decision. That's the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 had enough oil to go the distance, 5 didn't. They all started off well. Some of them didn't pursue to the end. So I'm getting preachy, and I'm not apologizing for it, but I look forward to, in some respects, I look forward to what God is going to do with the persecution that comes. I don't look forward to being persecuted and to the difficulty. I'm not looking forward to going to jail or being ostracized or whatever. But I do
Right.
very much look forward to the work for the kingdom that Adonai will use this for. Just like Joseph said to his brothers, what they meant for evil, he used for good, for the saving of many lives. And we look forward
Mhm.
to and we pray for that end, that
Yeah.
Yeshua and that Adonai would do that in our country, in Canada, and all over the world.
I'd actually like to read, I think this would be a good closing of everything we've talked about today, of Romans 10, 1 through 5. I really like that verse of confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. It is a crucial part of what evangelicals would call soteriology. But I think that a grounding point would be these five verses, and these 5 verses I think speak to a lot of what we've just spoken about. It says that, brothers, my heart's deepest desire and my prayer to God for Israel is for their salvation. For I can testify to their zeal for God, but it is not based on correct understanding. For since they are unaware of God's way of making people righteous, and instead seek to set up their own, they have not submitted themselves to God's way of making people righteous. For the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. For Moshe, or Moses, writes about the righteousness grounded in the Torah, that the person who does these things will attain life through them. The idea that we are saved, this present idea, isn't just something that you do with your heart or your mouth. It is an active, hand-foot based approach that God has specifically set up to say, this is the way I'd have you go. Alexander in Canada, the lady that I met with the IMB, these people are actively, and even Matt, you too, the hands and feet that you are using to see God's righteousness fulfilled is the groundwork, which it's within the bedrock of Torah. And I don't think that's emphasized enough, that just because you believe in God and that just because you believe that God raised him from the dead, there's more to it than that. I am so thankful that people are willing to confess that. But what Matt was talking about earlier about the wheat and the chaff being separated, what does that more mean to you? Is it just something that you're willing to believe in because you don't want to go to quote unquote hell? Or is it something that is driving you into a relationship with God? And if that's the case, what does that relationship look like? What does that relationship yield? What are the fruits of that relationship? Which of course go on and on in conversation. But I pray that we would continue to get to know God's way. I truly do. And wherever we're wrong, God will make that clear to us. He says that in Philippians 3. But I am so thankful for Alexander and what he was doing. I'm so thankful for this lady that I met. I'm so thankful for everything that's going on in the Ukraine right now. I'm so thankful for what's going on in the church all over the world. I'm so thankful for what's going on with believers' hearts going all around the world right now. And it is our prayer that these people would continue to seek God more and more and more, and to have that relationship with him. So with that said, we really appreciate you tuning in today. Hopefully our topic didn't turn you off. Hopefully it turned you on to some very real things going on in this world that we live in right now. And so if you have any personal thoughts on this or any ideas or comments, please write them into us, beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. We'd very much like to hear from you, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Bye-bye.